That has not been achieved in 60 years.
It hasn't, and that is regrettable. But it's changing. That's why we have this meeting. That's why we have a meeting of heads of state and government next month to discuss this very subject.
So will that change? Can Africa speak with one voice? We couldn't speak with one voice on Gaddafi. We couldn't speak with one voice on Egypt. We have not spoken with one voice on many things. Why, what is the impetus? What has changed?
But also count the areas in which we have spoken with one voice. I know and I've been participating, whether you talk of EPAs, whether you talk of AGOA, whether you talk of WTO, and whether you talk of climate change, Africa has been speaking with one voice. There are areas that we never speak with one voice, yes. And those contradictions exist all over the world. Even if you went to the north, they were not speaking on the same voice, even on Gaddafi, as you mentioned.
Well, infrastructure that connects African countries, and I'm talking now about intra-African trade. Let me first ask you, is intra-African trade also very important? West African intra-trade, Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho. Is that important? Is that an important part of the thinking?
Yes, it is. In fact, the proposals before the ministers is that we should now move to create a continental free trade area. And in creating a continental free trade area,
a continental free trade area.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are basing it on what has already been achieved by regional economic communities. If you look at in Eastern and Southern Africa, there are 3 blocks there: COMESA, SADC, and East African Community. These have achieved an advanced form of a free trade area because substantially most of the products are now traded duty-free, quota-free. And they have decided to come together and form a grand free trade area for the 3 that will comprise 26 countries. That is already half of Africa. And if you look at in terms of GDP, in fact, it's more than half of Africa. Now, in that sense, you already have almost half of Africa that is already moving in that direction. What we see, there are gaps, for instance, in Central Africa. Truly, in those economies, infrastructure is a major challenge. Production is a major challenge. But there is already demand for what they produce in some parts of the other regions. If you take the case of DRC, a lot of farms within that region are interfacing with the farms from Eastern and Southern Africa for investment in that region to produce minerals and the rest, timber and the rest. But what we now need is, how do we assist Central Africa? How do we facilitate ECOWAS to move faster than they are moving? ECOWAS has done well in the area of free movement of people. You have a common visa, passport. You
not
can move
just yet, but we are getting
a passport.
There.
You can move. You can get your visa at the border.
Yeah. But it could be difficult. Traveling from Ghana to Nigeria could be a nightmare.
I know.
Yeah.
But those are the areas now we need to put down a checklist of issues that we must address and have a timetable on addressing them, have a monitoring mechanism, a reporting mechanism, if necessary, name and shame, so that we can move the continent forward.
Name and shame is a very big part of the discussion in terms of the politics. Do you think that you would have the political will, because you're going to have personal political egos competing with the greater good of the greatest number of African countries, and Africa has been plagued by that for a very long time. Do you think that that is over? You think we are over and done with it? There was recently an election in Gambia that many people thought was not a very good election, but President Jammeh has a big ego, and he's an important member of ECOWAS, and you have all of these little issues to deal with. There's no clear-cut political entry point and exit point, and it becomes a very touchy issue.
Again, your question is loaded, but let's take bit by bit. First of all, where there is a will, there is a way. And what we need is to empower our citizens. Once they're empowered, you've seen what has happened, whether it's in Tahrir Square, whether it is in Tunis. The people were in the street and they demanded things to be done. A country deserves the leadership and development that the people within that territory allow. So within the country, you must have that determination and self-awareness to push for your rights. The second aspect, if the private sector knows that is beneficial for them to be able to invest across the border, that is beneficial for them to import from the border. Whether you have police blocking those borders, trade behaves like water. It will go through. And that's why you have black markets and the rest, whatever that name means. And so information is power. Let's empower the citizens, yourselves as information, so that you can put pressure, but also highlight the benefits of trade. This morning, when we were opening the meeting of ministers of trade, the minister from Rwanda gave a classic example of how Rwanda has embraced regional integration and how Rwanda is doing very well, because in the beginning they were fearing that being in a grouping of East African Community and COMESA, there were larger players, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, but Rwanda decided to take them on by opening and enabling the citizens to be able to compete on equal terms. Rwanda is winning now and is doing much better than the rest of those economies because of embracing change. So apart from empowering its citizens, any forward-looking government, we all know, no country will ever develop without embracing trade. Name one that has developed without trade. So it's a matter of closing our doors. We'll continue to suffer, but the moment we open, opportunities will be big.
You talked about Rwanda, and the question again comes up. Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, had human rights issues to deal with. And increasingly, this becomes part of the news headlines. And there are people in Rwanda who think that their human rights has been abused. And going forward, you're always going to have that kind of situation, especially when we don't have a blueprint of what human rights is across the continent, as maybe Europe or the United States may have had over the years. Don't you think that will continue to be an inhibition?
But I think this is where we again mix issues, because Africa is not static. Africa has a history. We have come from history where we have had civil war, where we have had to fight for colonial occupiers, and those liberation movements could have easily also, as they even assume government, you see contradictions in the way they manage the state and so forth. But again, look at the trend. 25 years ago, you and I, if you take Qatari, how many countries conducted free and fair elections? Where was Ghana 25 years ago? But today, what would you say about Ghana? This is the same picture that you see emerging in many parts of the continent. And so let's not continue looking at the glass is half empty. The glass is half full.